Good morning, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. It's Monday, May 26th, 2025, and this is your special Memorial Day edition of the AM Update. A deep dive into the explosive 409-page HHS report exposing the risks of controversial medical treatments given to children with gender dysphoria.
Even adult men can hardly tolerate it, and we're giving it to 11-year-old children.
Whistleblower Dr. Eithan Haim breaks down the findings.
Then we're going to absolutely have now a stronger scientific basis to say that this is not an appropriate use of Medicaid money.
Deputy Assistant to the President May Mailman lays out what this means for federal funding and the political fight ahead. All that and more coming up in just a moment on your AM Update. It was not supposed to get this bad. You were on top of your bills and then inflation hit. Been there. Groceries, gas, everything shot up, and now prices are up 26% from just a few years ago. 26%. It's not necessarily your fault if you have fallen into debt. Let me share a smarter, faster, far easier way out of debt. It's called Done With Debt, and they are not like other debt relief companies. They don't push loans or bankruptcy on you. Done With Debt has legendary negotiators who go head-to-head with your credit card and loan companies. They have one goal: to drastically reduce or eliminate your debt altogether. They move lightning fast. Most clients see more money in their pocket month one. But a word to the wise: hurry, because some of their debt erasing strategies are time sensitive. Consider talking to a Done With Debt strategist before you make another bill payment. It's free. Visit donewithdebt.com. That's donewithdebt.com, donewithdebt.com. In January, President Trump signing an executive order titled Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation, marking a major step toward a key priority of the administration, ending what it calls a dangerous medical trend harming America's youth. Among its directives, a full scientific review of current medical guidance. That review, released in early May, a 409-page report titled Treatment for Pediatric Gender Dysphoria, Review of Evidence and Best Practices. According to the report, quote, an estimated 3.3% of adolescents in the U.S. identify as transgender, and an additional 2.2% question whether they might be. A growing number of these minors receiving drastic, often permanent, medical interventions pitched as necessary, even life-saving. The report covering the risks, outcomes, and scientific basis behind puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and gender surgeries on children, ultimately concluding that the evidence supporting these treatments is low quality and the potential for irreversible harm is high. It also includes testimony from whistleblowers who say children are being rushed into life-altering procedures without proper safeguards. One chapter taking aim at major medical groups like the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, known as WPATH, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the Endocrine Society for using vague, ideologically loaded language that obscures biological reality. Quote, proponents of medicalization go to extraordinary lengths to avoid the plain use of the words male and female and related words such as boy and girl. When sex is defined, the definition is rarely correct, and in any case, the preferred phrase is sex assigned at birth. That's a phrase HHS says is medically inaccurate. Medical organizations endorse this vague language as a means of destigmatizing gender dysphoria and promoting what they call gender-affirming care. But the report argues this language manipulation is misleading, ideologically driven, and obscures the biological reality at the heart of the debate. We spoke to Dr. Eithan Haim, one of the whistleblowers cited in the report. He says this language is not just misleading, it is deliberately deceptive.
Sex assigned at birth is another euphemism they use to bully people into ignoring what they know to be true. That's a completely insane, non-medical, it's essentially witchcraft. Gender affirming care is a meaningless phrase that has no definition. They never define gender. They never define affirming. And then it's unclear how they're caring for these patients. So that's one thing I think that's great about this HHS report, is that they use language that better defines what's actually happening.
Dr. Haim says terms like gender-affirming care and top surgery used to describe double mastectomies on healthy teenage girls, are euphemisms meant to sanitize radical, potentially devastating procedures.
That's what's really concerning as a surgeon is the euphemisms they use for these very radical surgeries. What quote unquote top surgery involves is the resection of all of the breast tissue in a female. And who they're recommending this to is not only adult patients, but pediatric patients, children who are 15, 16, 17 years old.
According to a 2023 study published by the American Medical Association, between 2016 and 2020, at least 3,215 patients between the ages of 12 and 18 underwent breast or chest procedures as part of gender transition surgeries. The HHS report also scrutinizing puberty blockers, promoted by activists as safe, temporary, and fully reversible. WPATH describes puberty blockers as a pause button, giving children time to explore their gender identity without the pressure of ongoing physical development. But the HHS report strongly challenges that framing, citing studies that show over 90% of children who begin puberty blockers go on to the more invasive interventions like cross-sex hormones, whereas if left alone, most children will grow out of their gender dysphoria. The report also takes aim at one of the most common talking points, that puberty blockers are reversible, which Dr. Haim calls medically dishonest.
The language they often use is reversible. And that, again, is a euphemism. It's a euphemism for something much more sinister. Because with medicine and surgery, there's nothing that is technically reversible. What's more accurate is to say the effects can be minimized. So say a child receives one round of puberty blockers. If they go back to, withdraw themselves from these gender clinics, go back into puberty, it's not reversible. What you would say is that the effects are minimal.
Rather than pressing pause, the report suggests these drugs act more like a fast track toward permanent medical transition. Dr. Haim explaining how puberty blockers affect the body.
They were originally used for advanced prostate cancer. Even adult men can hardly tolerate it, and we're giving it to 11-year-old children. It's like doing 1 million microsurgeries on your cells every single day for years. If you block Tanner stage 2, they will become infertile. They will not develop their secondary sexual characteristics. When you block the progression of puberty, you will have permanent changes to your bone density. You will withdraw the sex hormones required for brain development.
Despite their widespread use, the HHS report makes clear the long-term effects of puberty blockers and other medical interventions for gender dysphoria remain largely unknown. Dr. Haim says WPATH's influence reaches far beyond its own ranks, shaping the policies and guidance of nearly every major medical association in the country. What looks like a medical consensus, Dr. Haim argues, is actually a closed loop, where activist-driven guidelines are recycled, repackaged, and passed off as settled science.
All of these guidelines, right, all of these statements about gender, quote unquote, gender-affirming care being medically necessary, it comes from WPATH. They use their activists and their so-called experts. Then they launder out those activists and experts to other organizations. And that's one thing that the HHS report demonstrates beyond a reasonable doubt. The WPATH experts are laundered out to the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Endocrine Society, the American Medical Association, and then these other organizations then use the same flawed talking points from WPATH to create the perception of a consensus.
WPATH reps exposed last year in leaked videotape acknowledging that children cannot possibly give informed consent to these procedures, which can cause sterility and loss of all sexual function.
So we're often explaining these sorts of things to people who haven't even had biology in high school yet. I think when we're doing informed consent, I know that that's still a big lacuna. We try to talk about it, but most of the kids are nowhere in any kind of a brain space to really talk about it in a serious way.
WPATH has responded to the HHS report saying it, quote, misrepresents existing research and disregards the expertise of professionals who have been working with transgender and gender-diverse youth for decades. Dr. Haim explains why so many doctors with years of medical training fall in line with guidance that to outsiders can seem extreme or even irrational.
We work by professional guidelines. Whatever direction the mainstream of medicine is going, most doctors will abide by because there is a massive risk in breaking away from that mainstream. That risk is, being professionally ostracized, being fired, having your credentials, looked at by, your state medical organization, which will absolutely happen if you do break away from the mainstream.
While the HHS report does not call to implement specific laws or regulations, its findings speak volumes. The evidence for medical transition in children is weak. The risks are extremely serious, and therapy remains the safest path forward. Coming up, what's the point of a 409-page report if it does not make any specific recommendations? Deputy Assistant to the President May Mailman joins us to explain how this report could still reshape policy moving forward. Tax day may have passed, but for millions of Americans, the real trouble is just beginning. If you missed the April 15th deadline or still owe back taxes, the IRS is ramping up enforcement, and every day you wait might make things worse. With over 5,000 new tax liens filed daily and tools like property seizures, bank levies, and wage garnishments, you don't want to mess around, okay? The good news is there's still time for Tax Network USA to help. Self-employed or a business owner, even if your books are a mess, they've got it covered. Tax Network USA specializes in cleaning up financial chaos and getting you back on track fast. Even after the deadline, it's not too late to regain control. Your consultation is completely free, and acting now could stop penalties, threatening letters, and surprise levies before they escalate. Call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Megyn. You may have missed April 15th, but you haven't run out of options. Let Tax Network USA help before the IRS makes the next move. The executive order commissioning HHS's Treatment for Pediatric Gender Dysphoria Review of Evidence and Best Practices used bold language, accusing medical providers of, quote, maiming and sterilizing a growing number of impressionable children. We spoke to Deputy Assistant to the President May Mailman, a key architect behind the Trump administration's gender-based executive orders, who explained the approach the administration took to the executive order and the report.
Well, the report itself is meant to speak to both a medical and an audience that hasn't made up their mind yet. So maybe you're somebody and you feel like your kid might be going down this path. Maybe you're a judge. Maybe you're a policymaker. Maybe you're on the left. And this report should be approachable to you as a truly balanced, non-triggering, readable, usable document. And so the language is attempted to be truly neutral.
While the report does not spell out specific policy changes, Mailman says it gives lawmakers, regulators, and even private institutions a new scientific foundation to revisit their medical guidelines. The report offering a neutral counterweight to the ideologically driven recommendations of groups like WPATH, a leading pusher of so-called gender-affirming care and one of the strongest voices trying to normalize radical medical interventions on children.
One of the problems is that not only doctors, but judges, government entities, state and local governments, we're oftentimes relying on the WPATH or sort of politically charged, very pro, quote unquote, transition medical material. I use medical pretty loosely there. Now you've got some basis to go look at that. But from a administration perspective, if we're looking at where our Medicaid money is going, for example, and there are hospitals that are trying to harm kids, but to have life-altering interventions for kids who the vast majority of them are going to grow out of their gender dysphoria, then we're going to absolutely have now a stronger scientific basis to say that this is not an appropriate use of Medicaid money.
Mailman also saying the report could strengthen future legal action, especially for child detransitioners who later feel they were misled by doctors or pushed into irreversible procedures. by exposing what she calls the weak scientific basis behind today's so-called standards of care. Mailman's saying the findings could help patients like Chloe Cole, who had a double mastectomy at age 15 and who later detransitioned, hold doctors and institutions accountable, giving courts a framework for challenging what many now see as experimental medicine.
My hope is that the way to fund Chloe Cole and other detransitioners who do deserve strong legal representation is if there's money on the other side, right? If they can sue and if they can win, that is what this document, what the Gender Dysphoria Review will help with, because it basically shows that doctors who are relying on WPATH or other junk science, that they know that this is based on nothing. That the WPATH is not only a political document, but a lot of the quote unquote standards of care that are being pushed right now in the United States are not based on scientific evidence.
That'll do it for your AM Update. I'm Megyn Kelly. Join me back here for a brand new Megyn Kelly Show today, live on SiriusXM Triumph Channel 111 at noon East, on youtube.com/Megyn Kelly, and on all podcast platforms.